I never thought I'd reach a point in life where I'd feel guilty for simply saying, I can't. But here I am. It started on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where the sunlight feels too bright and the silence feels too heavy. My son, Mark, had called the night before, asking if I could watch the kids again the next morning. It would have been the 5th day in a row. Now, don't get me wrong. I love those little ones more than life itself. My grandkids are my heart. Their laughter fills every quiet corner of this house that's far too empty most days. But my body, it just doesn't move like it used to. My back aches, even after folding laundry. My knees sound like old wooden floors every time I stand. And by the end of the day, I can barely make it up the stairs. So that morning, I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and said the words I'd been dreading. Mark, honey, I can't babysit today. My back's really acting up. There was silence on the other end for a moment. I could almost hear him rolling his eyes. Then he said flatly, Mom, we're counting on you. Emily has work, I've got meetings. What are we supposed to do? I tried to keep my voice calm. I understand, sweetheart, but I've been watching them all week. Maybe you can find someone else for today? I just need a little rest. That's when his tone changed. Sharp, impatient. Then you're just unreliable, he said. He paused before finishing the sentence. Like even he wasn't sure he wanted to say it out loud. Then you're just selfish, I froze. I don't even remember breathing. Selfish? That word hung in the air like a cold wind cutting through me. I'd spent decades putting my family before everything. I raised him, worked extra shifts when his father was sick, skipped vacations to pay for his college, missed sleep to sew his Halloween costumes, and sold my wedding ring just to cover the down payment for his first home. And now, because I couldn't babysit one more day, I was selfish. I wanted to say something back, but all that came out was a whisper. Mark, I'm just tired. He sighed heavily. We all are, Mom. But we do what we have to do. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long while just holding the phone in my lap. The clock ticked loud in the kitchen. Outside, the leaves rustled, and a car door slammed somewhere down the street. Life was moving, but I was stuck. I'd always believed that growing older meant earning rest, peace, maybe even a little gratitude. But instead, I felt like a burden in my own family story. The character who was once essential, now inconvenient. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words. Then you're just selfish, over and over again. I thought about all the times I'd said yes, even when my body screamed no. All the nights I'd stayed late, cleaning up after dinner, folding tiny clothes, rocking crying babies while they went out for date nights. And somehow, the one time I said no, it erased everything. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house, quieter than usual, colder too. I made myself some oatmeal and sat by the window. Across the street, I saw my neighbor, Helen, stepping out to walk her dog. She waved. I waved back, pretending to smile. I could have gone to visit her, maybe talked it out. But something inside me said I should stay still. Just sit in the quiet and feel everything I'd been holding back for years. I started thinking about my mother. How she used to say, love isn't always returned the way you give it. Darling! At the time, I didn't understand. I thought love, especially a mother's love, came with an unspoken promise that one day it would be remembered, appreciated, returned. But now, sitting there with my aching back and my son's words echoing in my head, I realized she'd been right. The hardest thing about growing old isn't the pain in your body. It's realizing that the people you gave everything for have moved on from needing you, except when it's convenient. Later that afternoon, I checked my phone. No message from Mark, not even a text to ask how I was feeling. I thought maybe Emily, my daughter-in-law, would reach out. She's usually the gentler one. But nothing. Instead, my phone buzzed around 6 p.m. A photo notification popped up. It was a picture from Mark's social media. Him and the kids at the park. The caption read, "Family time after a long week. Grateful for these moments." I stared at that picture until my eyes blurred. Family time. Without me, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just hollow, like a part of me had quietly faded away, and no one noticed. That evening, I decided to take a walk. I put on my old sweater, the one I'd knitted years ago when my arthritis wasn't so bad. The air was crisp, the kind that smells faintly of wood smoke and fallen leaves. I walked past the houses, each one glowing warmly with life inside. Families eating dinner, kids laughing, the clinking of dishes. I passed by the playground where I used to take Mark when he was little. I could still see him running toward the swings, calling, "Push me higher, Mom." His laugh had been the best sound in the world back then. Now the swings creaked in the wind. Empty. When I got home, I sat down in the living room and turned on the TV. But I wasn't watching it. My eyes were fixed on the reflection in the glass. An old woman sitting alone in a room filled with old memories. I picked up a framed photo from the shelf. Mark at 10 years old, missing a front tooth, smiling wide at the camera while I held him close. I traced my finger along his face in the photo. "I did my best," I whispered. But maybe my best wasn't enough anymore. That night, before going to bed, I wrote something in my journal. Something I hadn't written in years. I love my family, but I'm starting to wonder if they will still love me back, or just what I do for them. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and listened to the quiet. The next morning, the phone rang again. It was Mark. My heart jumped a little. Hope always does that, doesn't it? Even when it shouldn't. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "Listen, about yesterday. Emily and I talked. We just think maybe it's better if we figure out another arrangement for childcare." My chest tightened. "Oh, of course, honey," I said softly. "That might be best." He paused. "It's just, you know you're getting older. We don't want to put too much on you." I wanted to believe that was concern, that somewhere in there was love. But it sounded more like an excuse. "I understand," I said. "You have to do what's best for the kids." "Yeah," he replied quickly. "Anyway, we'll see you soon, okay?" And then, just like that, he hung up. I sat there, looking around the room again. At the toys still sitting in the corner, the half-folded blanket I had used when the youngest took naps here, the coloring books stacked neatly on the table. All traces of a life that used to fill my days. For the first time in years, my house was quiet. Truly quiet. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or heartbroken. The next few days went by slower than usual. There's a strange kind of stillness that fills a house after the noise leaves. Not just the noise of children playing, but the small sounds too. The little footsteps running across the hallway, the laughter, the way someone always seemed to call, "Grandma," from another room. I didn't realize how much I'd built my days around those sounds until they were gone. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned the kitchen twice, reorganized the pantry even though it didn't need it, and ironed pillowcases that didn't need ironing. Anything to fill the quiet. But by afternoon, I'd find myself sitting on the couch, just staring at the framed photos on the wall. There were so many. Birthdays, graduations, holidays. All frozen moments where I was still part of their world. In one of the pictures, I was holding my granddaughter, Lily, the day she was born. I remember that day so clearly. I was the first one to hold her after Emily. She was so tiny, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, her little hand gripping my finger. I remember thinking, this is love coming back around. I believed in that moment that all the sacrifices, all the long years of work, worry, and waiting had come full circle. That one day, I'd sit at a big family table surrounded by laughter, love, and the people who knew what I'd done for them. But now, that picture just reminded me of how fast things change, How love can fade in ways you never expect. A few days later, I decided to call Mark again. Not to argue, not to bring up what he'd said. I just wanted to hear his voice. To feel, even for a minute, that we were still connected. He picked up after a few rings. "Hey, Mom," he said, a little distracted. "Hi, sweetheart. How's everyone doing?" "Good, good, busy. The kids are great." "That's nice," I said softly. "I was just thinking about them. I miss them." There was a pause, and then he said, "Yeah, they miss you too." But his tone didn't sound like he meant it. It was the kind of thing you say because it's polite. "I'd love to see them sometime," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe this weekend?" He hesitated again. Maybe. We'll see how the week goes. Emily's got her sister's baby shower on Saturday, and Sunday's kind of full." "Oh, of course," I said quickly. "I understand." I told him I loved him before hanging up, and he said it back. But it was rushed, distracted. Like a formality, after the call I sat in silence again. I could feel my chest tightening, not from anger, but from something heavier. That quiet ache that comes when you realize you're slowly being left behind. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about that word he'd used. Selfish. It echoed through my head, changing shape every time I replayed it. Was I really selfish for wanting to rest? For wanting one day to take care of my own pain instead of everyone else's? I thought back to the years I spent caring for everyone. Not just Mark, but his father too. My husband had fallen ill young. I was the nurse, the cook, the cleaner, the comforter, the one who held the family together. And I did it all without complaint, because that's what love looked like to me. Giving, even when there wasn't much left to give. Now, in this stage of my life, all I wanted was a little understanding, a little gentleness. But it seemed like somewhere along the way, the world forgot that older hearts still feel everything just as deeply. The next morning, I made myself some coffee and went out to the porch. The autumn air was crisp, and the sound of birds was the only thing filling the space around me. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders and sat there for a while, watching the world move without me. Across the street, I saw a young mother holding her toddler, laughing as he tried to chase a falling leaf. For a moment, I smiled. But then it hit me how long it had been since I'd laughed like that with my grandkids. My eyes welled up and I whispered to myself, what did I do wrong? I hadn't meant for life to turn out like this. I thought family meant forever. That love was enough to hold us together no matter how life changed. But maybe love alone isn't enough when people stop seeing your worth. Later that day, I went through an old box of letters I'd kept in the attic. Most of them were birthday cards from Mark when he was little. "Happy Mother's Day to the best mom in the world," one of them said, written in a child's uneven handwriting. "Thanks for always taking care of me. I love you forever." I held that card to my chest and closed my eyes. The little boy who wrote those words. Where had he gone? Did he still exist somewhere inside the man who now called me selfish? It's strange how time can turn everything upside down. The people you once carried in your arms end up being the ones who make you feel small. That night, I made a small dinner for myself. Soup and a piece of bread. I used to cook big meals, even when it was just me. Old habits. But lately, cooking for one just feels heavier. The clatter of dishes in an empty kitchen somehow makes the loneliness echo louder. After dinner, I turned on the old lamp by the window and sat in my favorite chair, the one that used to creak when my grandkids climbed onto my lap. I looked at the empty space where they used to sit, and I realized something. I'd been measuring my worth by how much I was needed, and maybe that's why this hurt so much, because when they stopped needing me, I didn't know who I was anymore. But as I sat there, I started to remember my own mother again. How she used to hum to herself when she felt lonely. How she'd say, "We all grow into seasons where we must learn to love our own company." I never really understood her words until that night, Maybe this was my season to sit in the quiet. Not because I'd been forgotten, but because I'd given so much of myself to others that I'd forgotten how to just be. As I looked out the window at the moon rising over the neighborhood, I whispered to myself, "You're not selfish, you're just human. You're allowed to rest." For the first time in days, my shoulders relaxed a little. I took a deep breath and felt the weight lift, even just slightly. I knew things weren't going to change overnight. Mark might not call tomorrow, or even next week, but maybe, just maybe, I could start finding peace again. Not in being needed, but in knowing I had loved, truly and deeply, even if that love wasn't always returned the same way. And maybe that was enough. A week passed before I heard from Mark again. I didn't expect his call. Honestly, I'd begun to tell myself not to expect anything at all. Expectations, I'd learned, were where heartbreak started. It was a Tuesday morning. The light was soft through the curtains, and I'd just sat down with my tea. My back ached, but not as badly as my heart had been aching these past few days. I was flipping through an old photo album when my phone started ringing. "Mom," Mark said, his voice flat. "Hey." "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my heart leaping a little even though I tried to sound calm. "How are you?" "Busy as usual. Listen, Emily's starting her new job next week, and the daycare doesn't open till 9. Could you maybe come by early in the mornings and watch the kids till then? Just for a bit." There it was again, that tug of war between love and exhaustion. I hesitated. I could already feel my back stiffen just at the thought. "Honey," I said softly, "I'd love to help, but mornings are really hard for me. I can barely bend down before I stretch out. My back just..." He sighed sharply. "Mom, it's just for a couple of hours. I don't get why this is so hard for you." "I'm not saying I won't help," I said gently. "I just need a day or two to rest between visits. You know my back isn't the same anymore." Silence on the other end. And then, coldly, "You used to do more when we were kids." "I was younger then, Mark." Another pause. Then he said, "Never mind. I'll figure something out." Before I could say another word, he hung up. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the steam rising from my cup of tea. There was no anger in me, just this deep, aching sadness. The kind that makes you question your place in someone's life. I whispered to myself, "I used to do more because I could. That's all." I spent the rest of that day trying to distract myself, but it was no use. Everything reminded me of what used to be. The toys still tucked in the corner of the living room. The drawings my grandkids made still hanging on the fridge. Their little handwriting spelling, "Grandma's the best," in colorful crayon. I could have taken them down, but I didn't have the heart to. That night, I lay awake thinking about the years I'd spent putting everyone else first. I remembered the nights I'd stay up sewing Halloween costumes, packing school lunches, waiting for Mark to come home from football practice. I remembered holding him when he cried after losing his first game, and staying by his side when he was sick. And now, it felt like he had no memory of any of that, like all of it had faded into some background noise of his life. Something easy to forget. It's a strange thing, motherhood. You give everything you have. And when they grow up, it's as if they forget that version of you ever existed. The next few days, I stopped calling. I didn't do it out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I needed to find something, anything, that made my world feel full again. So I started walking, just around the block at first. The cool air in the mornings was sharp, but it felt good against my skin. I'd nod at the neighbors, watch the trees shed their leaves, and breathe in that quiet sense of life continuing, even when everything inside me felt paused. One morning, as I was walking past the park, I saw a familiar little girl waving at me. "Miss Carroll," she called. It was Emma, my neighbor's granddaughter. "Hi, sweetie," I said, smiling. "What are you doing out so early?" "Mommy's at work." "Grandma takes me to the park before school," she said proudly. I looked over and saw her grandmother sitting on a bench, knitting. She smiled at me warmly and I walked over. "Morning," she said. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," I replied, sitting beside her. "I haven't been out here in ages." She laughed softly. "You should come more often. Fresh air does the soul good." We sat there for a while talking about little things. The weather, our gardens, the way the seasons seemed to pass faster every year. It was simple, but in that moment it was what I needed. Connection. As I walked home afterward, I realized something small but important. I didn't need to be surrounded by my family to feel a sense of belonging. Sometimes the smallest exchanges could remind you that you're still part of the world. That evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and pulled out my old knitting needles. My hands were slower now, but the rhythm of it was soothing. I decided to knit something for myself for a change. A soft shawl, just to keep warm during the colder months. It felt almost rebellious, choosing to make something for me. While I worked, I thought about how life had shifted. Once everything I did was for my family, every thought, every hour. But now, maybe it was time to learn what it meant to give that love back to myself. The next weekend, I went to the grocery store and ran into an old friend, Helen, from church. She hadn't seen me in months. "Carol, it's been too long," she said, giving me a warm hug. "Where have you been hiding?" I smiled. "Just figuring things out, I suppose." "Well, we've missed you. We're starting a little book club at the community center. You should join us." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe I will." And I did. Every Wednesday afternoon, I started going. We'd read a few chapters of something light, nothing too heavy. Just stories that made us think, that made us feel less alone. There was laughter and tea, and that lovely hum of voices filling a room that had once felt too quiet. It didn't erase the ache completely. Nothing really does. But it reminded me that life doesn't stop just because people drift away. Still, every night, when I'd sit down after everyone had gone home, I'd check my phone, hoping maybe for a message from Mark. Sometimes I'd see pictures of my grandkids online. Birthdays, school events, trips to the zoo. I'd see Emily's smiling face beside Mark's, and the kids holding ice cream cones. They looked happy. And though my heart squeezed, I always smiled, because no matter what, that was still my family, even if I wasn't there. But there was one picture, one that stayed with me. It was taken at the park where I used to take them. They were sitting on the same bench where I'd once read them stories. The caption said, "Family time is the best time." I remember whispering to myself, "It used to be." Then I closed my phone and sat there in the quiet, letting the memories fill the empty spaces of my heart. That's when I realized, love doesn't vanish just because it's not returned the way you hope. It lingers, soft and constant, like the faint smell of perfume on an old sweater. And maybe that's what keeps us going. It was early March when the confrontation finally happened. Not planned, not prepared. Just one of those moments life throws at you when your heart can't carry the silence any longer. Mark showed up at my door unannounced. It had been weeks since I'd last heard from him, and even longer since the kids had visited. I was sitting by the window working on that shawl I'd started when I heard his car pull up. My heart skipped in that familiar, complicated way. Hope and worry tangled together. He came in without knocking, like he used to when he was a boy. "Mom," he said, setting his keys on the table. I was nearby. "Thought I'd stop in." I looked up and smiled faintly. "That's nice, honey. It's been a while." "Yeah." He hesitated, glancing around like he wasn't sure what to say next. "You've been okay?" "I've been managing," I said softly. "And you?" "Busy. Work's been crazy. Emily's been stressed. The kids." He stopped mid-sentence, rubbed the back of his neck. "Anyway, I know I haven't called much. "No, you haven't," I said, not accusing, just stating it like a fact. He looked uncomfortable. "Things just got a lot. You know how it is." I nodded. "I used to," I said gently. That seemed to unsettle him more. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward the window. "Mom, listen," he started, about what I said before. "I didn't mean to make you feel unwanted. I felt overwhelmed. We needed help with the kids. And when you said no, when I said no because I was in pain," I interrupted softly, "because my back isn't what it used to be, Mark." He sighed, frustrated. "I get that. But it just felt like you didn't want to be there for us anymore." I put down the yarn in my lap and looked at him fully. "Mark," I said, steady but firm, "I was there for you every day of your life, from the moment you were born until the day you moved out. And even after that, I've been there in every way I knew how. But I'm not the same woman I was 20 years ago. My body doesn't move like it used to. My energy isn't endless. That doesn't mean I love you any less." He didn't say anything, just looked down at his hands. "You said once that I'm just making excuses," I continued. "Do you know how that felt? To hear that from my own son, after everything?" His eyes flicked up to mine, and for the first time I saw something crack in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or realization. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said quietly. "But you did," I replied, "because I raised you to be kind, to think before you speak. And sometimes I think you forget that I'm not just your mother. I'm a person too, a tired, aging woman who still loves her family more than anything." He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you're not needed." "I don't want to be needed," I said softly. "I just want to be wanted. There's a difference." The silence between us after that was heavy, not angry, just full of everything left unsaid for too long. He rubbed his face with his hands and muttered, "I guess I've been taking you for granted." I smiled sadly. That's what kids do, until they don't have their parents anymore. He looked up at me sharply, and I could see the sting of that truth in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said after a long pause. "Really, I am." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "I know, honey. I know you are." He leaned back, sighing. "I've just been so busy trying to hold everything together. Work, the kids, the bills. I guess I forgot that you were holding things together for years before I even knew what tired felt like." I nodded. "That's life, sweetheart. We only understand what our parents did for us when it's too late to give them the same in return." He reached across the table and took my hand. The first time he'd done that in a long while. "I'll do better," he said. "I promise." I squeezed his hand gently. "Just remember to visit once in a while. Not because you need something, but because you want to see me." He nodded. "I will." He stayed for about an hour that day. We talked, really talked, about little things, about the kids, about old times. It felt almost normal again. When he left, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "Love you, Mom." I whispered it back, holding on just a little longer than usual. After he drove away, I sat there for a long while, the quiet settling around me like a blanket. There was peace in that silence now. Not because everything was perfect, but because I'd finally spoken my truth. Later that week, he called again, just to check in. It wasn't a long call, but it meant more to me than he could ever understand. And a few days after that, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, I saw my grandkid standing there, holding a plate of cookies. "Daddy said we should come visit Grandma," little Sarah said, grinning. "We made these with Mom." Tears welled up instantly, but I blinked them back and smiled. "Well, come on in, my darlings. Let's see what kind of cookies we've got here." They ran inside, filling the house with laughter and the soft sound of their tiny feet on the wooden floor. The rooms that had felt so empty suddenly came alive again. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole. Not because everything was fixed, but because there was love in the house again. And that was enough. That evening, after they'd left and the quiet returned, I sat by the window again. The sky was painted in the soft pinks and purples of sunset. I pulled my shawl around my shoulders and smiled to myself. I knew things would never go back to exactly how they were before. Time doesn't work that way, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe this new kind of peace was what healing really looked like. And even if tomorrow brought more silence, I knew I could handle it, because I'd learned something important. Love doesn't always come in grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it's in the small visits, the shared cookies, the promise to call again. It's in knowing you mattered, and still do. That night, as I sat alone in the dim glow of my living room lamp, the house felt quieter than usual. But not empty. There's a difference, you know. Emptiness has a kind of ache to it, a coldness that seeps into your bones. Quiet, though. Quiet can be gentle. It can feel like peace if you let it. I sipped my tea, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Each second seemed to hum softly, like a reminder that life keeps moving, no matter what's been lost or mended along the way. I thought about Mark, about that afternoon when he finally came by, about the way his hand trembled slightly when he reached for mine. For a moment, I saw my boy again. Not the grown man weighed down by bills and deadlines, but the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, his hands dirty, his smile wide. How quickly those years slip away. 1 minute, you're chasing them through the house with a towel because they've just run out of the bath. The next, they're standing in your doorway, too grown up, too tired, trying to remember the woman who used to hold their whole world together. Sometimes, when I look at myself in the mirror, I see pieces of the past reflected back. The young mother I once was, the laughter that used to fill our kitchen, the hands that never seemed to stop moving. And then I see the woman I am now, slower, softer, wiser, lonelier perhaps, but stronger too. Getting older has its cruel ways. You start to fade from the edges of everyone else's story, even though you once were at the very center. People stop asking what you think. They stop waiting for your opinion. You become mom, or grandma, or the old one, instead of you. But I've learned something through all this. Through the hurt, through the silence, through the long nights spent wondering what went wrong. You can't control how others love you, but you can choose how you love them in return. When Mark forgot me, when the visits stopped, when my days stretched into long, quiet hours, I had a choice: to grow bitter or to grow softer. And though it wasn't easy, I chose the second, because bitterness eats at you from the inside, but softness keeps you human. I started writing again, little notes, letters to no one in particular. I wrote down memories of Mark's first day of school, of his laughter echoing down the hall, of his teenage years when he thought he knew everything. I wrote about the day I held my first grandchild, and how my heart felt like it might burst right through my chest. Sometimes I read those letters out loud, just to remind myself that those moments were real, that I was loved, that I mattered. And lately, I've started sending those letters to Mark, not to guilt him, not to make him feel bad, just to remind him of who we were, of what we built together, and maybe to remind him that I'm still here, still loving him, still proud of him, even after all the hurt. A few days ago, he called me again. He said, "Mom, we're having a barbecue next weekend. We'd love for you to come." I felt my chest tighten at those words. Love. We'd love for you to come. I told him I'd bring my potato salad, the same one I used to make every 4th of July. He laughed, said, I was hoping you'd say that. And I realized, right then, that sometimes love doesn't come back in fireworks or grand apologies. Sometimes it comes back in small invitations, in simple words that carry all the weight as what was once broken. When I hung up the phone that night, I sat for a long while, just breathing it in. The relief, the gratitude, the quiet joy that comes when something you thought was gone begins to bloom again. You see, life doesn't give us do-overs. Not really. But it does give us moments where forgiveness can slip in through the cracks of all the things we wish we'd said sooner. And as I look around my little house now, the same one that once felt too quiet, too still, I don't feel alone. Not truly. Because peace has a way of filling the spaces that grief once lived in. When I walk into my garden in the mornings, the sunlight hits the flowers just so, and I can almost feel my husband beside me again, smiling that patient smile he always had. And sometimes, when the wind blows, I like to think it carries with it all the words we never got to say to the ones we love. Little whispers that travel through time and memory, reminding us that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. So if you're listening to me now, maybe you felt forgotten too. Maybe someone you love has stopped calling, or the visits have grown few and far between. I know that ache. I know what it's like to stare at a silent phone and wonder if you still matter. But let me tell you this. You do. You matter more than you realize, even if they don't say it, even if they've grown distant. The love you gave, the care, the laughter, the sacrifices, it left a mark on them. A mark that time and distance can't erase. Maybe one day they'll remember. Maybe they'll show up again, like my son did, standing at your door with guilt in his eyes and love in his heart. Or maybe they won't. But either way, your story still means something. You are still the light that once guided them. You are still the hands that held them when the world was too big. You are still the reason they learned what love feels like. So don't give up on that. Don't stop loving, even when it hurts. Because love, real love, isn't about what we get back. It's about what we give and how we choose to keep our hearts open, even after they've been bruised. And if tonight feels lonely, if the house feels too quiet, then pour yourself a cup of tea. Sit by the window. Watch the world move gently outside. You're still here. You're still part of it. And somewhere out there, someone is thinking of you. Maybe even missing you more than they can admit. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with me. If my story touched your heart, if you've ever felt what I've felt, forgotten but still holding on, then I hope you'll take a moment to share this. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it too. So please, like, share, and subscribe. Not just to support me, but to keep stories like ours alive. Stories that remind people that even when love fades, it can always find its way back home. Because sometimes, even after all the silence, love still knocks on the door.